Some people like to be very aggressive and go straight for the kill. And others, they like to be more annoying and force the opponent to think about all their life decisions. If that's something that describes you, then this might be the deck for you.
Stand up! Vanguard!
Even in the post-Gize worlds, there is need for an enforcement. Within the Cosmo Police, you can only find the best of the best. And among these elites, there's one promising young agent which is making way through the world. Not only through the organization, but also through the underworld. Aurora Battle Princess Seraph is a rising star in the field of law and enforcement. She has a natural ability to capture foes that led her to have a staggering 100% arrest rate. But where most agents only specialize in capture, Snow can find her way on an all-out battlefield. This makes her feared by her opponents and revered by her allies. This is seen through her abilities, as her first ability allows her to capture 2 of her opponent's units from the field and put them into the prison. Now our opponent might be able to free his cards from the prison, but not without paying its tax. But before they're able to do that, she's able to empower herself through her second ability, which allows her to gain extra power and drive checks the moment a certain threshold of cards in the prisons are met. This allows her to put extra pressure behind the imprison mechanic, as not only will it waste your opponent's resources, they also need to waste more shield in order to defend themselves against your attacks. And most of the Seraph Snow deck will play out this dynamic, where you're going to use your abilities to imprison your opponent's units. They're going to try to free those units from the prison, but before they can do that, you will gain advantage from having a certain amount of cards in your prison. Now, of course, before we can get this whole dynamic going, we need to have our prison. And currently we only have access to one type of prison, which is Galaxy Central Prison Galactulus. It basically is a place where we can put the cards that go to prison, but our opponent is able to free them by paying either a soul blast per 1 card or a counter blast per 2 cards. And in most instances, this is the same amount of resources we're going to pay to get them in the prison. So we're basically trading resources with our opponent. But our opponent also needs to put his resources into his own game plan, so over the course of the entire game, we're going to outvalue our opponent, as they need to waste way more resources than we need to do. Now, moving up to the actual units, we see a very important grade 2 unit for Seraph Snow, as we have Aurora Battle Princess Aggro. She's a card that works very similar to Seraph Snow, as she can be able to imprison something from the field, but she also gains more power onto the board if we have enough cards in the prison, making her a strong beater on top of also adding the control effect. And even on top of that, she is also a very nice shield card, as she can be a solid 15k interceptor or 15k shield from hand. Now keep in mind, you need to accelerate the imprison fast enough and high enough so your opponent has more trouble of getting those cards out of prison to negate this power and shield increase. One way to do that, and another way to decentivize our opponent to free their cards, is with a brand new grade 2 Aurora Battle Princess Perio Turquoise. This is another card that can be a solid 15k beater and making good columns just like Aggro, but she also makes our opponent's cards way weaker once they get out of prison, thus removing the incentive to actually get those cards out of the prison, as in most instances they cannot even make good numbers, as a grade 2 becomes a 5k unit, a grade 1 becomes a 3k unit or a 3k booster, thus making it very hard to actually make numbers on the board. The only reason why your opponent might want to get those cards out of the prison is if they have very strong effects, or they just want to negate your effects, but that's very wasteful in terms of the resources they are spending to do so. Another card that allows us to go into that long game is the new grade 2 Aurora Battle Princess Daria Violet. This is effectively another type of perfect guard that the imprison mechanic has access to, only in this case we need to have enough cards in the prison, and we can only use this against grade 2 attacks. Can also work on rear guards, but only on grade 2s. This card's effectiveness all comes down to what your opponent is playing and what type of strategy they're deploying. Most of our offensive grade 2s do get an additional 5k power, making solid 15k numbers that can become 23k with an 8k booster, but we can make it even higher thanks to the introduction of Aurora Battle Princess Rounded Azili. And Rounded Azili is effectively that extra free 5k power, thus making those columns hit for 28k, which is a really good number to hit. And she's in the same same ballpark as Aggro Rouge, so if Rouge is live, then Azili is also live. Now, most of these cards require us to have a certain amount of cards in the prison, and we do have cards that allow us to get there, but it all depends if our opponent is calling units to the field. So if they don't call anything, then it's going to be hard to get those cards in the prison. But one way to get around that restriction is with the inclusion of Bizarre Beast Bug Motor. This card allows us to get those cards into the prison even if they do not call any cards to the field or only call cards that disappear, because they're going to have cards in their drop zone, and this card allows us to get those cards from the drop into the prison in the first place, which is really nice to set up our conditions because it does allow us to get to those 2 cards in prison, but sadly not further than that. But 2 cards in prison for most skills is definitely enough. But we have another option to go even further beyond that, as we have a brand new grade 2 normal order in the likes of Moment of Capture Aurora Battle Princess 24-hour coverage. This is great for not only acquire more cards in the prison, but it can also be used as an offensive card, as it allows you to put your opponent's hand size to potentially only 3 cards, and if you then start hitting with 3 big numbered attacks, they might not be able to guard all of your attacks, and thus allowing you to go for the 6 damage win. Now, for the right line for our Seraphs though, we only have one actual option, and that is the actual Aurora Battle Princess right line with Kyanite Blue, Rizat Pink, and Seraph Snow herself. Now, the reason why this right line is the only option is because of Kyanite's Blue main effect, which allows us, the moment she's placed on the Vanguard circle, to search for the prison. The entire mechanic revolves around you having the prison, so if we do not have this consistency option, the whole deck won't work. This also allows us to just play a one-off copy of the prison, because we always have that card access to us on turn 1. And then going into Rizat Pink the following turn, we're able to at least get 1 card in the prison because we ripped 1 card from our opponent's hand, which is great. Now, of course, our opponent can play around it by putting a specific card that they can actually get value off, but at the very least, it puts 1 card from their hand into the prison, which then can be recycled over and over again because it's going to be called to the field, and we can keep capturing it over and over again with our other cards. So the overall right line for Seraph Snow is basically there to set up your game plan, as the grade 1 gets you the prison, the grade 2 starts your prison game plan, and then going into your grade 3, that's when the real fun starts, as that's when everything is going to go off. The trigger lamp is once again going to be relatively flexible, as every type of trigger is doable or workable with Seraph Snow, as your crits put more pressure behind your triple drive, and it also synergizes really nicely with the over trigger, which doubles the critical. The front triggers with extra shield helps you to stall into longer games, and that makes it more favorable for Seraph Snow. And you're going to attack with your Vanguard always first, and you're going to have sizable numbers on the side column, so having an extra 10k on those units is also going to be nice. But also draw triggers aren't that bad, because you have multiple unplace effects that you want to reuse, so you want to draw into multiple copies, and you definitely rely on certain cards like an early game bug motor, or your 24-hour coverage, or maybe one of the perfect guards. It can be the grade 2 or your actual perfect guards, but personally I would advise a trigger lineup being 4 heals, 4 of the new 20k shield fronts, 7 crits, and the over trigger for Brandgate. The reason why I personally won't go for the draw triggers is because not only will you have access to the triple drive of Seraph Snow, you also do soul charge free cards in the early game when playing the prison, so if games go on long, having those draws might actually be detrimental, because you can definitely go deck out, because you're going faster through your deck than most decks do. So having those draws on top of it might backfire against you. The Seraph Snow build is actually really interesting because you have different ways how you can build the deck. And for this spotlight, I'm gonna showcase 2 specific decks, one with a more offensive focus and one with a more defensive stall focus. So for the offensive focus, we have this particular list. Now, as you can see, it holds all the cards that we discussed. We have our grade 2s, which allows us to imprison. We have the Turquoise, which basically de-incentivize your opponent to get those cards out of the prison. And because they will probably keep a couple of cards like Rouge, Azili, as well as Violet will probably be more consistent, so we can easily run those cards. But we do have the Bug Motor to at least get our engine going in the off chances our opponent tries to counterplay us, or they have ways to benefit from cards from their prison and they can easily free those. We can use the Bug Motor to always get that free prison, or potentially 2 free prisons if we have 2 Bug Motors on the field and they empty their entire prison. Now, the main strategy of this is to just be very aggressive. You can make very strong columns, as your Your offensive grade 2s can be 15k beaters, but we have the 13k boosters with Azili, which then allows us to create 28k columns. That together with our Vanguard, which is going to be 23, potentially a booster behind it can be even higher, and you start to ramp up a lot of damage if we also include our triple drive as well as the potential of persona riding. And on top of that, using the 24-hour coverage to not only secure the free cards in prison, but this can also be your finisher if you see that your opponent has only a limited hand size. You can put those hand size even lower and then wrap it up with your strong attacks. Now you see the one-off inclusion of hyperspeed robo chevel stud, and this is basically our flex spot, a attack option that we can use. Same goes with Azili, because you don't have to rely on the 13k boosters. Now chevel stud is an interesting card because it not only opts as a imprison card, but it also allows us to draw into more cards if we need it. So we can use this card for draw power as well as getting to those third prison every single turn. So it's a relatively flexible card, but I don't want to max out of this card. It's just a flex spot because the counterblast and soul blast cost can definitely be heavy and we don't necessarily rely on it, but it can come up here and there. Now another option that you can potentially play with is with Detonation Mutant Bulbamine. As you might have noticed, we don't play any Bulbamine in this list, and the reason why that's the case is because we actually do have enough resource for our skills, because we generate free soul with the prison, and with our normal ride line we have another free soul, so that's 6 souls in total. Aggro Rouge uses 4 soul in total for every single copy. Order card also uses soul, which is another 4, so that's 8 soul. And then Dairy Violet is also 2 soul in total. So we have 10 cards that uses 1 soul, and we generate 6 out of the gate by just a normal game plan. We do have our persona right, so we can generate even more soul. So overall, we should have enough soul, and that's if we're talking about if we see every single copy of those cards, which definitely will not be the case every single game. But if you feel like you need more counterblast and more soul, then you can definitely rely on Detonation Mutant Bulbamine to generate the resource that you might miss. Now, as I said, this is mainly the aggressive build, where you just want to create columns, imprison your opponent to get those numbers, and just beat them with free, relatively strong attacks with the addition of the control aspect that the prison mechanic brings to the table. But we can opt to go for a bit more defensive playstyle, where we're going to stall more and just outvalue our opponent. And if you want to do that, we can change the list a little bit with the ratios and add 2 new cards, and then you create something like this. So overall, the top side and the bottom side of this list doesn't change all too much, but if we take a look at our tech spot for the grade 2s as well as our grade 1 lineup and the orders, you can see a big difference. So first off, you see that we run no grade 1s except for Bug Motor and our Perfect Guards, and we did include a new norm order as well as another grade 2. That grade 2 being Aurora Battle Princess Spark Lemon. This is a card that works similar to Bug Motor, where we can imprison cards from our opponent's drop zone, only this comes with unhit pressure. This is our main card that allows us to go for games. And it might sound weird because he's just at 10k, but a lot of players will actively, aggressively guard against this attack to not give you that extra free imprison options. So they're gonna waste their shield in the early game to just not let this attack go through. And at the same time, they're probably going to attack into this card to get it rid of the field, which is great for you because it means that even more shield you don't have to waste on protecting your Vanguard, thus allowing you to stall even more in the long game, because as you also can see in this list, we do run another extra copy of Violet, so we have yet another Perfect Guard to play with in the mid to late game. But with Lemon in the mix, this also means we will have more consistent ways of accelerating the amount of cards in our opponent's prison. So that then also allows us to play yet another new addition in this list, which is the new Blitz Order Explosive Melting Heart. This can be a massive shield for 1 or potentially 2 attacks. This card scales to the amount of cards that we imprison, which means that if we have 2 to 3 cards in the prison, she can be a solid 10 to 15k shield for a Soul Blast. But the main thing about this card is that the power decrease actually stays until the end of turn. So if that unit would restand, like in Bruce or Bastion's case, then that power decrease will then be transferred to the second attack as well. So then this card suddenly becomes a card that can block 2 attacks or save you maybe 20 to 30 to 40k shield in 1 turn, which is actually really good for actually stalling the game. And that is basically the main idea behind this deck, where you just want to stall as long as possible, and with cards like Lemon, you can still whittle down their defensive options as they're going to hard guard against those attacks. And we of course also have our 24-hour coverage to potentially whittle down their resource even more, and then just win it through the resource game, as at some point our opponent will run out their counterblast and soul blast, whereas this deck will probably last longer and can also still create those sizable numbers that we're going to need to push for game. One thing you can experiment with is that in the list in this video I've shown so far, both only use one copy of the prison. Now you can get away with just running one copy of the prison, but there are scenarios where you open up with this card even after you mulliganed, and that means you don't get the free plus of your Kyanite Blue, which is definitely wasted value, as it could have been an extra card in hand, and yes, it might be a prison, but you can still discard it for your right line or for your perfect guards. And on top of that, it does generate free soul. So if you think like you need more soul, you can play 2 prison, and you can use the prison later down the line again. But beyond that, we do have a couple of extra card options. One of those cards being the new grid one, Aurora Battle Princess Whopper Bloon. Whopper Bloon is basically a different form of Bulbamine, and this works really well in the stall deck where you're going to imprison a crap ton of cards, as then you can use her as a solid potential counter charger or soul charger, as she also generates the free soul. Sadly, you don't get both, but you do get a bit more than what Bulbamine can provide, and she stays on the board, so you can still pressure for a turn. And in the mirror match, it's actually kind of funny, because if they imprison this card, you can keep calling it back and back and back. Another card you can experiment with is Aurora Battle Princess Beard Canary. This is effectively our actual retire option, because now we can put cards from the prison into the drop zone. This is great if you see a very important tech card or a combo piece that's in the prison, and you don't want to give your opponent access to that card. So with this card, you can remove it from play essentially, because not a lot of decks have drop zone recursion, and this then allows you to get rid of the card entirely. This also combos very nicely with your right line grade 2, because if they put a grade 3 or a combo card from their hand, which they believe they're going to get access next turn, you can slam this card down to the field and basically say no to that play. And finally, another alternate option that I want to highlight is the grade 3 Twisting Bulldoze. Now, not a lot of people might give this card a lot of credit, but it does generate actual value, as it can turn a counterblast into soul blast, which in the prison deck is equal to losing 1 prison, but in trade-off for that, you get additional 10k power onto the board. That's actually a pretty sizable number, as it's a 23k attacker. It is stronger than your grade 2s. Even with the booster behind it, it does reach a higher magic number. And some people do play the grade 3 Aurora Battle Princess support card, which also costs a counterblast that imprisons something and gains 5k power. But this card doesn't prison you, but it gives you a soul, which is equal to a prison, but it gains 10k power instead of 5. So in my eyes, this card is definitely better than that card, as it generates even more value on top of everything. This is basically Seraph's in a nutshell, where we talked about all the basic knowledge that you need to know to grab the cards and start building your own deck and deploying whatever strategy you want to do. Now, of course, there is a lot more to explore here, as there are a lot of interesting tech choices and other directions you can take, and the Seraph Snow deck allows it to go in that direction. And the best way to experience that is just to go out there, try to build a deck, try to see what works for you, and then adjust your game strategy as you experiment and see what gives you the biggest win rate or gives you the most enjoyable play experience. But with that said, I want to give a huge shout out to my Patreon supporters over patreon.com/VanguardInsider. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a patron today. But with that said, I've been Mr. Time Leap, and I see you guys in the next one!